Sometimes, life leaves us with unfinished conversations. Words we meant to say, moments we wish we could step back into, even for a breath. If I Could Say One More Thing is a podcast about those moments. About love, loss, timing, forgiveness, and the quiet ways we learn to begin again. Each episode is a story inspired by real people and the things they never got to say. The apologies, the thank yous, the maybes that shaped them. Because growing up isn't about having fewer feelings. It's about learning what to do with the ones that stay. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing. Some people enter our lives like mirrors, showing us not who we are, but who we might become if only we could stop mistaking comfort for connection. Aiden and Nora were one of those almost stories. Two people who fell into each other before either had learned how to stay. Years later, they meet again at a wedding in Santa Barbara, where the ocean hums like memory and the air smells faintly of what could have been. This is their story about love, timing, and the quiet courage it takes to decide instead of slide. Here's the one I almost became. The problem with weddings, Aiden decided, is that they are emotional high-wire acts disguised as buffet lines. He had barely stepped onto the sun-bleached lawn of the Santa Barbara estate when the string quartet started playing something that sounded like optimism. He hadn't heard that sound in a while. The Pacific glittered in the background like a guest who had outdressed everyone. Aiden adjusted his tie and reminded himself that he was here for the chicken or fish, not the flashbacks. Then he saw her. Nora. She was standing near the bar, laughing at something a man said, the kind of laugh that made people turn to see what they had missed. 8 years since he had last seen her, yet his body recognized her before his brain did, like a song that starts halfway through, but you still know all the words. She spotted him a beat later. Her smile froze, then softened into something wry. "Oh," she mouthed. Exactly, he thought. Oh. The word was the same one she had said the night they met, over a plate of cold tiramisu and bad jazz in someone else's kitchen years ago, when "oh" still meant surprise instead of history. They had met at a dinner party in Los Angeles, back when their friends were still hosting dinner parties instead of toddler birthdays. He was 29, she 27. He had been dragged there by his roommate. She had come for the free wine and the illusion of adulthood. Nora had just started a job as a junior architect. Aiden was working in marketing, which he liked to describe as creative adjacent. The way people describe Diet Coke as basically the same. They spent most of the night debating whether happiness was overrated. She argued that happiness was the baseline, not the goal. He said it sounded exhausting. By midnight, they were leaning against the kitchen counter, eating tiramisu straight from the dish, and he was thinking, this could be something. It was, just not what either of them could name. They dated without ever agreeing that that is what it was. He left his hoodie at her place accidentally. She texted him about it 3 days later, pretending irritation. He texted back, "Good, it looks better on you." It was the kind of romance built on plausible deniability. Some habits don't die, they just age. And now, standing beside her again under fairy lights and champagne chatter, he felt that same tug. The one that pretends to be nostalgia when it's really unfinished business. "Didn't expect to see you here," Aiden said when they finally faced each other beside the bar. "I could say the same," Nora replied. "You still have the same tie." He looked down. Classic, not lazy. They clinked glasses. Hers champagne, his something that tasted like regret diluted with soda. "So," she said, "you're still in marketing?" "Yep, still convincing people to want things they don't need." "You?" "Still designing buildings that no one can afford. We've both found our niches in capitalism." Her humor hit differently now. Still sharp, but less defensive. There was space around her words, like she had learned to breathe. His laugh caught on something, maybe the speech, maybe the memory of all the versions of love he had once believed in. One in particular had a name, and for a moment, he let himself drift there, back to the last dinner before everything between them quietly untied itself. Their non-relationship had lasted 2 years, which was impressive given its lack of definition. They were intimate without intimacy, close without clarity. Aiden had thought love was supposed to feel like a chase scene, exhilarating, slightly dangerous, and ending in collapse. Nora, meanwhile, had been trying to interpret silence as depth. "He's thoughtful," she'd tell her friends. He's just not verbal." He was verbal about everything else. Movies, politics, whether the best fries were crinkle cut or shoestring. They had almost broken up over that. But when she would ask, "What are we doing?" he would joke, "Having fun. Revolutionary concept." They slid, as people do, from weekend sleepovers to weekday habits, until one night, after a dinner that tasted of exhaustion, Nora said, I can't keep pretending not to need more." Aiden, caught off guard, answered with the worst possible sentence. "Can we talk about this later?" Later became never. She stopped calling. He didn't chase her, partly pride, partly fear that she would say yes. And yet, here they were, years later, dressed for someone else's forever, orbiting around each other again like muscle memory with good posture. When the groom's uncle made a speech about finding the one, Aiden leaned toward her. Statistically, there's probably a 2 or 3 before the 1, he whispered. She snorted in her wine. You'd find a loophole in a love story. He smiled. Occupational hazard. Between toasts, they traded updates. She had bought a modest little place just outside San Francisco, somewhere where the fog still found her, but rent didn't bite as hard. He had started running again, though mostly from feelings. After Nora, he had dated efficiently, like someone checking items off a list. Witty, kind, emotionally available, preferably not more than he was. He even married once, briefly, to a woman who loved spreadsheets and silence. It ended quietly, no drama, just a mutual recognition that they had built a house with all the right angles and no windows. Nora, he later learned, had worked on community housing projects, learned to surf badly, and learned, with some resistance, to be alone. When the DJ switched from ballads to something suspiciously early 2000s, Aiden said, "You want to dance?" She raised an eyebrow. "You hate dancing." "I hate weddings more. This might counterbalance." They joined the crowd. The music was upbeat, which spared them the danger of eye contact. Still, when their hands brushed, it felt both new and entirely familiar. Halfway through the song, he leaned in. "I used to think we didn't work because of timing," he said. "And now? Now I think we didn't work because I mistook comfort for connection." She nodded slowly. "And I mistook potential for promise." For a moment, the air between them felt honest in a way it never had before. After the bouquet toss, which Nora narrowly dodged, they slipped outside. The ocean was a dark whisper below the cliffs. Fairy lights flickered across the lawn. They sat on a bench, shoes off, champagne replaced by water bottles. "You remember that argument we had about whether happiness was overrated?" Aiden asked. "I won," she said. "Debatable." "History favors the architects." He laughed, a low, surprised sound. "You haven't changed much." "Oh, I have. I just kept the good lines." He looked at her then, really looked. The tiny lines at the corners of her mouth, the calm in her posture. "I used to lie to women," he said finally. "Not big lies, just the ones that made me sound like someone who had it together." She tilted her head. "And now? Now I just try not to lie to myself. Progress in small increments." She smiled, not pitying, just kind. That's the only real kind of progress. From her side of the bench, Nora studied him. Older, a bit weathered, still charming in that self-effacing way that once drove her mad. He had been the first man who made her laugh during a panic attack. The first she had believed could read her without translation. But he had also been the first to show her that wanting to be known and being ready to be known are not the same thing. When she had left him, she had promised herself not to wait for anyone's readiness again. And yet, sitting beside him now, she felt that old gravity, softened by time, but undeniably there. "I'm glad you're okay," she said. "Define okay." "You know, you're still making jokes. That's a good sign." "It's either that or start a memoir." "You'd hate editing." "True." The party was winding down. They stood at the edge of the lawn where the fairy lights ended and the dark began. "So," he said, "friends?" She considered. "I think we were always something friend adjacent." "I'll take it." She hesitated, then added, "Maybe we were just the rehearsal for the better versions of ourselves." "Speak for yourself," he said lightly. "I peaked in 2014. She laughed, and he wanted to bottle that sound. He offered to walk her to her car. At the parking lot, she turned, keys in hand. "You know," she said, "for years I thought closure meant understanding what went wrong. Now I think it's just being able to stand next to someone and not flinch." He met her eyes. "Then I guess we're closed." "Maybe," she smiled. "Or maybe we just finally opened the right door." She kissed his cheek, brief, warm, final, and not final, all at the same time, and drove away. Driving back along the coast, Aiden rolled down the window. The night air smelled like salt and eucalyptus and second chances that weren't exactly chances, more like permissions. He thought about Nora's words: rehearsal, closure, doors. He thought about how love isn't a miracle that happens to you. It's a discipline you choose. He had spent years trying to fix loneliness with proximity, mistaking physical nearness for emotional presence. It was like standing in the sun and wondering why you still felt cold. Tonight had been different. They had both stayed awake, no slighting, no pretending not to care. At a red light, he laughed to himself. Maybe next time we decide," he said aloud, and the line felt borrowed from a wiser version of himself, the one he almost became. Sometimes, the people who once loved us don't disappear. They just change shape. They become the stories that help us tell the truth. After this story was recorded, I spoke with Aiden and Nora from opposite ends of California to ask what it felt like to meet again after all those years, to talk about love, timing, and the fine art of growing up without growing apart. For privacy, all names and identifying details have been changed, but the laughter, the pauses, and the tenderness you're about to hear, those are entirely real. Here's our conversation. Hi, Aiden. Hi, Nora. You're each sitting on opposite sides of California, Aiden in LA and Nora just north of San Francisco. But somehow you already look like you're at the same table.
Yeah, except my table's covered in takeout containers and Nora probably has like candles and a lemon tree.
Close. It's a ficus and a scented candle that claims to smell like Pacific morning.
So, the story starts with your reunion at a wedding. Who saw whom first?
She did, I swear. I was just doing my usual thing, trying to blend into a hedge.
You were not blending. You were the only man in a navy suit with sneakers.
They're leather sneakers. It's called California formal.
Did either of you rehearse what you'd say?
No, I thought about it once, years ago. One of those mental arguments you win in the shower. But in real life, all I managed was, oh.
Yeah. And somehow that one syllable was worse than if she'd thrown a drink at me.
Okay, so no scripts, no safety nets. Very on brand. When you saw each other, what was your first thought before you edited it into something polite?
Wow, she still makes people turn to see what they missed.
Mine was, he still overthinks everything.
You two had what I called a beautiful, undefined relationship. Emotionally furnished, just no floor plan. If you had to name it now, what would you call it?
Probably two smart people making dumb choices.
Or season 1 of a show that never got renewed.
That's brutally accurate. So, Aiden, in the story you said you mistook comfort for connection. What does that mean to you now?
I think I liked how easy it was to be with her, how safe it felt. And I confuse that with depth. But safety isn't intimacy. It's just comfort with better lighting.
Yeah. And I think I mistook his calm for certainty. Like, I thought if he wasn't panicking, he must be sure about me. Turns out he was just avoiding.
I prefer the term emotionally minimalist.
Was there ever a night where you almost said, let's make this official, and didn't?
Yeah, his birthday. I had made a dinner, even bought this dumb little cake that said, you plus me equals TBD. But halfway through that evening, I realized I was the only one ready to define us. So I just blew out the candle for both of us.
I remember that night. I almost said something too. Not official, but something like, don't leave. But she looked so sure of herself. I figured she already had.
When you think about those younger versions of yourselves, what do you feel towards them now?
Affection and embarrassment. I thought self-awareness was the same thing as growth. It's not. It's just noticing the mess with better vocabulary.
Yeah, I used to think love meant patience. Now I think it means participation.
Nora, in the story you told yourself not to wait for anyone's readiness again. Did you manage to keep that promise?
Mostly, though sometimes I still wait. Not for people, but for permission. To move on, to want more, to not feel guilty for outgrowing someone. But I'm getting faster at leaving the waiting room.
That's such a Nora thing to say. Poetic, slightly devastating.
And Aiden, you admitted you used to lie. Not the big kind, but the little ones that make you sound together. What lie did you most believe about yourself back then?
That I was fine. You know that LA mantra. I'm good, I'm chill, it's all good. Translation, I'm one text away from an existential crisis.
You were the most articulate man I ever met who couldn't say what he felt.
Yeah. And you were the most patient woman I ever met who shouldn't have had to be.
If you could have sent each other a message 5 years after you stopped talking, what would you have said?
Thank you for being the first person I ever wanted to do better for.
Me too. But next time, let's actually do it.
That bench scene in Santa Barbara, it felt like two people finally telling the truth. Do you think friendship is the final form of love or just a safer version?
I think friendship is what happens when love grows up. When you stop needing to own it.
Yeah. Friendship is love with better boundaries. And less laundry.
So when you think about that last line, maybe next time we decide, what does decide mean to you now?
It means showing up, choosing someone even when it's inconvenient. I used to think chemistry was enough. Turns out you also need calendar invites and emotional honesty.
Yeah, decide means you stop waiting for signs and start creating them.
Would you recognize love today if it came quietly? Not like a chase, but more like an invitation?
I think I'd finally answer the door.
And I'd finally stop knocking.
What do you think your story taught you about timing and taking responsibility for what you feel?
That time's not about clocks or calendars. It's about courage. You're ready when you stop confusing fear with wisdom.
And responsibility? It's realizing silence is still communication, just usually the wrong kind.
If you could say one more thing to your younger selves, what would it be?
Stop auditioning for people who already like you.
Stop mistaking peace for boredom.
Before we close, I asked both Aiden and Nora to write one line, just one sentence they wish they had said to each other years ago. Neither has seen what the other wrote.
I used to think I needed to be understood to be loved. Now I know I just needed to stop hiding.
Back then I thought loving you meant waiting for you to be ready. Now I know love is what you do when you stop waiting.
And maybe that's the closest thing we get to closure. Not agreement, but understanding. The sound of two people telling the truth, finally, at the same time. Some stories don't end. They simply evolve into quieter versions of themselves. Aiden once told me he used to think he needed to be understood to be loved. And Nora said she once believed love meant waiting for someone to be ready. Maybe they were both right. Maybe love really is a translation, not from language to another, but from who we were into who we're still becoming. If this story reminded you of someone you once almost became, or someone you're still becoming, I'd love to hear from you. You can send your story request or reflection to SayOneMoreThingPod at gmail.com, or find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Say One More Thing. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.